Hi everyone, welcome to our live chat with Grameen Foundation CEO Alex Counts. My name is Darwin Cruz. I'm the online fundraising manager here at Grameen Foundation. I'm just going to introduce our special guests for our event today. We're so happy to have all of you joining us today, and we have so many supporters from around the world joining us as well. And we hope that this chat serves as a reminder for all the great poverty fighting work that's been done in the past, and also a reminder that we still have a ways to go towards our goal to a poverty-free world, and we couldn't do it without you, our super dedicated supporters. And so, just as an introduction, I'm located in our Seattle, Washington office, and you should also see on your screen the true stars of today's call: our President and CEO, Alex Counts, and our donor supporter, Bill Bennick, who's joining us from Austin, Texas. So, as you are, to just give you a quick orientation with the webinar, many of you have probably joined us before, but if you see the chat panel on the right side, you can submit your questions there. And right now, if you want to test out the chat panel, you can chat us with your name and your location. Let us know what state or what country or what city you're joining us from, and we'd love to give you a shout out and just welcome you here as part of our event. Great. So we are going to just cross our fingers. As always with technology, you never know what we're going to get, and so far I believe the internet connection is looking good, and we'll hope for that for the continuation of our event. And so just please bear with us if anything does go a little bit wonky with it. So, and if we just appreciate your patience and support through that. So, we're trying to do our best to be authentic, and we appreciate your patience and understanding if this call is not perfect and polished. Okay, so let's see who we might have on the line. 1 minute. Okay, so we have some folks from Harriet Stevenson. Thank you for joining us. Carolyn in New Jersey, and from Florida, we have Claudia, and from Minneapolis, Minnesota, Fatu. So many people who are already here, and Nicholas from Boston. So thank you to you, and so many others who are already chatting in, and we'll definitely recognize others. And at this point, I just want to introduce you to a very special guest who's joining us remotely, as I mentioned, from Austin, Texas, Bill Bennick. Believe it or not, Bill was an intern in the early days of Grameen Foundation in 1998, and he's been a donor since shortly after that. Bill, we're so glad that you're here and that you joined us today.
Well, I've got to say it's really my pleasure. I've remained engaged with Grameen Foundation ever since those early days because I really love what the organization does, and I'm really happy to help out on this call.
Awesome. So as we thought, today's conversation, we want to be entirely driven by donors, and that's the reason why Bill is here. And Bill, are you ready to serve as the host for today's video chat?
You bet.
Excellent. So thank you so much. Well, Bill, would you mind to just share a little bit about yourself and why you chose to support Grameen Foundation, and maybe even a little flashback to the past, what it was like in the early days?
Sure. So, one thing about the early days, I know that Grameen Foundation has gotten quite big, and in the early days it was quite small. So I have good memories sitting with Alex in a circle in these really small staff meetings that we would have, and so it's it's fun to feel like I'm sitting across from Alex and be able to look across and see him there. In any case, these days I live in Austin, Texas with my wife and 3 young children, and I work for Boeing in IT. And in a sense, you could say that my first IT job was my internship with Grameen Foundation. I was studying public relations at the time, and I came to Grameen Foundation to help the development director. And when you're dealing with a nonprofit, the development director is looking to raise money and deal with people. It's not IT where the development director is saying, go build a database. But what happened on my first day was we sat down with the chairman at the time, whose name is Jim Sams, And he was just pounding the desk saying, look, we need a better way to take care of tracking our donors and dealing with our mailing list. So I said, well, I could try to put together a database for you. And so we were off. And it was just one of these situations that I've encountered over and over again where technology is on the critical path to solving a problem to help people. And along those lines, Grameen Foundation has set up the Grameen Technology Center and has done all sorts of things to, again, leverage technology to be able to reach and help people. And I really appreciate that. It's part of why I support Grameen Foundation. There are a lot of organizations I've been involved with over the years, but I really like the way Grameen manages to leverage the intellectual capital that it has and the way it manages to reach a lot of people through so many ways. But initially, what brought me to Grameen Foundation was I was excited about microcredit's ability to lift people. And over time, as Grameen Foundation has turned into a larger service really for not just poor people, but also many organizations that serve the poor, I've loved watching all of the complementary services that have come in to support these borrowers. I mean, it's one thing to say to a person, yes, we'll give you a loan so that you can, plant some crops, but if that worker doesn't know the right time to bring their crops to market, or if that worker doesn't know that there's a weather system coming in that's going to make this particular day a very bad time to plant, they're going to have bad outcomes. And Grameen Foundation has managed to put together all sorts of complementary services, farming advice to farmers through community knowledge directors, information through mobile phones, similarly, health assistance, just so many things. And so that's what's really kept me anchored to Grameen Foundation. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Bill. I'm getting a message from some of our supporters that it's been hard to see the cameras. So if anyone's having trouble seeing our video, just chat that in, and we're going to do our best to make sure that you can see our webcams. So I think it might have just reactivated, so hopefully everything is good. Great. So thank you guys all for your patience. And just to repeat, in case anyone joined us late on the call, if you want to participate in our webinar today, a few logistics, you'll notice an information bar on the right side of the webinar screen. And you can type your questions into the chat panel there, and we will work our way through and try to ask Alex as many questions as possible. You can also figuratively raise your hand, and there's a button to do that. And if possible, we'll try to take one or two live verbal questions if we can. And if you have a camera on your computer and you want to show your video screen with us, you're welcome to. We may have one or two people join us as well. And lastly, you can join us on Twitter. You can use the hashtag GrameenFDNChat. You should see it on your screen. And we'll be live tweeting the webinar, so also join us in the conversation there with your thoughts and your questions. And all right, so I think I will go ahead and turn off my camera. Bill, I'll just turn it over to you, and you can continue to run this through nearly the end of the presentation. So thank you, Bill.
All right, and thank you, Darwin. Well, Alex, it's so great that you're available to me and other donors for these kinds of questions. I understand that people are preparing questions to submit, and I'd just like to start off by asking you a few things. I'm not sure what everyone's familiarity is with Grameen Foundation's work, or maybe with how you're emphasizing different services right now. How would you describe the work of Grameen Foundation for us?
Sure. Well, thank you, Bill, and thanks to all of you who are taking part in this, your afternoon if you're on the East Coast or whatever time of day it is for you. We really appreciate your interest in what we're doing. And Bill, especially glad you can join us. Bill was part of a kind of ragtag group of people, almost all of whom were under 30, many of whom who were barely 20 years old, who came together and launched Grameen Foundation in its first 2 years to become the organization that it is. And so it's a real pleasure. And we keep in touch with, as you probably know, Bill, a lot of those early friends and interns and staff of Grameen Foundation. The younger brother of Jeff Davis works here in our legal department, to take one example, so it's a tight-knit family, that those of us who are there at the launch, and great to have you involved. At the core, the way I think about Grameen Foundation's work, I think is very well captured in our pretty succinct mission statement, which is to empower the world's poor, especially the poorest, to create a world without poverty. Well, what that means is we actually believe, and this comes from my years in Bangladesh and my learnings from Professor Yunus, is that the poor have virtually everything they need, the capabilities to get out of poverty. It's just there have been obstacles put in their way by society to using that desire to get out of poverty and the capacity that they have. So, and the way we've decided to focus is to harness the power of the financial services revolution and the information revolution as ways to remove those obstacles. You know, for those of you who remember back into the 70s and even the 80s, accessing one's bank account, transferring money, or accessing information, something as simple as directions to how to drive to a friend's home that you've not visited before across the state, these are so much easier now. It's made our lives so much more seamless in so many ways. And if we can translate those advances to benefit the poor, rather than just making life more convenient, it can mean a life that is closer to being poverty-free. And this, in particular, translates into people having higher incomes, but it also translates into a very important concept called increased resilience. What resilience means to me is that when people have made some gains in their journey to lead a poverty-free life, protecting those gains is enormously important. You know, the world is on course to have reduced poverty by half by 2015, which is an enormous accomplishment, very little covered in the press. But once you make progress, making sure you don't fall back is extremely important. So what this means is both, again, raising your incomes or protecting income gains. It means, on the one hand, accessing credit so that you can engage as an entrepreneur if that's a desire of a poor family to start your own business or expand one. It's about saving money for a rainy day so you don't need to deplete your assets, your business, for example, if you're sick or you have an emergency. And also it's about translating financial services into a more digital format, which can be safer, more convenient, and more efficient for the poor. In more recent years, as Bill mentioned, as you mentioned, Bill, we've been going into a couple other domains, agriculture and health, and where we see that the power of finance plus information can be very powerful to help the world's small farmers generate more food and also more surplus income for themselves, so they can feed their families and, in fact, reinvest money in their farms, and also to allow people to take charge of their health care. And as you rightly said, it's as simple information as simply as a farmer getting an accurate weather report, or information about how to handle a certain disease and nip it in the bud, or a poor family getting a reminder about what type of medicine they're supposed to take on what day and when they're supposed to go in for a preventative treatment into a clinic, or what clinic is the closest clinic to their home to be treated for a disease that has come up suddenly. So this is really the core of what we see is, again, using these revolutions that have transformed our lives in a way that can accelerate this global trend for poverty reduction, because the faster we can eliminate global poverty, and the goal has been set for 2030 to do that, the more sustainable and peaceful a world that we're going to have to hand on to future generations.
I love that vision. You know, I was interested in asking you about how the vision may have changed in the 17 or so years that you've been running Grameen Foundation, but the way that you pitched it, I think, matches. You know, I think that's been very consistent throughout. If anything, what's changed then has not been the vision, but the strategies for supporting that vision. And can you tell us a little bit about some of the ways that those strategies have changed?
I think the strategies have changed, Bill, in part because the world has changed, and so let me go back to the early days of Grameen Foundation, where when we began, it was just simply to see if this idea of Grameen Foundation could survive, whether there was place for it in this community of really excellent global humanitarian organizations, and with the help and the sacrifices of people like yourself and Ruth Hoffman and Jackie Lippman, there was a role for us, and then we said we wanted to help. There was a global effort underway at the time, a global campaign to bring microcredit to 100 million of the world's poorest families. And what we wanted to do was to contribute to this global campaign, not that we were going to be the only contributor, but it was part of a true team effort. And I have to say that if you fast forward to 2006, 2007, that across the world, microcredit became much more accessible to a poor family than had ever been the case before in history. This global campaign that we were part of played a role in that. For most of the people on this call, you'll be familiar with the fact that a lot of Americans get 4 to 5 solicitations per day to get credit cards, and in a lot of poor villages and slums around the world, unlike when Grameen Foundation started, they have 4 or 5 different micro-lending organizations that are offering them capital for different life needs, whether it be for running a business, educating their child, financing the repair of their home, and so forth. So when the world changed, we decided to kind of take a step back and say, what could we do now that battle has been won in many respects? And we decided to tie ourselves to a much larger goal for 2030, which was the reduction of extreme poverty to under 3% of humanity, which is to basically virtually eliminate it. The president of the World Bank came out with that goal a couple of years ago. And so, again, not that we will be the only or even the most significant player there, but that's the larger vision that we're saying, how can we have the biggest impact towards reaching that kind of goal for humanity? And that's where we feel there's some work to be done in financial services, remaining work to be done in financial services, not so much in the amount of them, especially the amount of credit, but complementing that with other financial services such as savings and insurance, and getting the power of the digital revolution to allow people to transfer money not just simply by handing cash to a person to walk or bring on a bike or a bus to a big city, but to do it digitally. And also to realizing that in the countries where microfinance has been working, but the whole agriculture and healthcare systems are running at a very low level, it tends to impede progress. So we've focused on those 2 areas to leverage what we've learned and what we've in scaling up microcredit and microfinance to have a real breakthrough in terms of support of small farmers and support of the poor and taking charge of their health. But again, consistently, this idea of self-help has been there throughout, trying to stay true to the teachings of Professor Muhammad Yunus, who was so instrumental in founding Grameen Foundation. There's the commitment to volunteerism and involving people throughout civil society in the battle to reduce poverty. These are common through lines, but there have been certain ways that we've evolved, and it's good to see you and so many of our supporters kind of tracking those and appreciating them. And it's really, I'm pleased to be able to try to explain briefly why we've evolved with the times so that we can have the biggest impact on reducing poverty.
Yeah. Well, it is such a difference if now there are 4 and 5 microcredit organizations knocking on the door of a poor farmer. But one thing that you could explain a little bit further for me would be who are these 4 or 5 organizations? How many of them are nonprofits? How many of them are for-profits? What's the repayment rate look like? What does the interest rate look like? I was talking to a friend just the other day, and I told him about this conversation we were going to have, and he said, oh, microcredit, I had a bunch of friends who used to do that, but they became disenchanted because it didn't seem like it was working. But something is happening if there's 4 or 5 microcredit organizations in a town.
Sure, yeah. So it is certainly true that there have been some isolated cases of people, especially after the Nobel Peace Prize was given to Grameen Bank and Muhammad Yunus in 2006, that some people have been kind of rebranding what they were doing. Might not be anything more than what we would call payday lending in the U.S. and called it microcredit. So whether you're a financial supporter or you're a poor borrower in a rural area of Malawi, it's good to really not take at face value microcredit being done in the spirit that, say, Grameen Foundation and many other, highly ethical, socially motivated organizations do. If I think about driving through a town in Uganda where I saw 5 signboards as I entered town about microcredit, as best I can recall, 2 of them were nonprofit organizations that operated, one on a regional scale in Uganda, one on a national scale, that were highly efficient and business-like organizations, but did it as a nonprofit. Another was a cooperative that was organized according to cooperative principles, and the 2 others were for-profit. They did this in a business-like way, but they were doing it in what we call a single bottom line. They were doing it purely as a business. They might have social benefits, but that was incidental. Again, the interest rates vary, but typically they're a couple of percentage points at least above the commercial rate in the country, because as any of you have given this some thought can understand, making a $100 loan and $1 million loan, in many ways the costs are similar, because processing a loan is processing a loan. Now you can, and so as a result of that, the small loan size does mean that the cost is often a bit higher than a traditional businessman would pay for a larger loan. But where it's done efficiently, it's only slightly higher. In some cases, it's even dropped lower than that because people have really been able to work hard on the efficiency gains.
Okay. We have a question from Nicholas in Boston that was essentially this topic that we were just discussing. He was interested in these same things about some of the bad press that microcredit has received. And he also asks whether you think the sector as a whole can be a force for good rather than a few organizations. And I mean, that's kind of interesting. Certainly, some organizations are going to be more helpful than others. Maybe as you answer that, you could also tell us a little bit about the how well prospective borrowers are able to assess the suitability of these different lenders. Do they recognize the ones that are the payday style lenders?
No, that's an excellent question, and I think we need to realize that when the Nobel Prize was announced in 2006, and again, I think you'd left our team by then, at least in our office. And I called them together and I said, we're going to be, and our whole industry is going to receive more support than it's ever received before, but also more scrutiny. We need to be ready for both. And I think that so the quote-unquote bad press, which is, I think has been all throughout, has been overwhelmed by positive press. I think the press have generally done a good job in seeing that this is a real force for good in the battle against world poverty, as poverty rates, and I don't think it's coincidental that poverty rates have dropped at the time that microfinance has increased access around the world. But I think that I've been part of an industry-wide effort to basically create a certain credentialing for what it means to do microfinance ethically, and one of those is a kind of a consumer protection code that an increasing number of organizations, many of which have long-term partners of Grameen Foundation, have been certified as compliant with a broad range of consumer protection principles, which is basically saying that if nothing else, this is an organization that's take every possible measure to make sure they never do harm to a client. And that is something that we've been at the forefront of, and is a way that organizations can be sure, if you're a borrower, and that your organization has met these this kind of code of conduct standards. At the same time, we've also been working on another set of standards, which is how do you make sure that not just you're going to avoid doing harm, but it maximizes the likelihood that you're going to be doing good. And this is for any organization that has what we call a double bottom line, which is not just trying to operate in a financially sustainable way, but to really do good, to move the dial on world poverty. So these two emerging standards, which Grameen Foundation has been at the forefront of promoting, with 7 other networks that are part of this coalition that I co-chair, that we're trying to make it very clear to donors, to investors, and I would and to borrowers, to regulators, to everyone else in the ecosystem. And I think that the vast majority of those providing microfinance are doing it ethically and are doing it in a way that is trying seriously to advance social change. I don't think a couple of bad apples should make people worry about this fundamentally. It's again a community of people that again I've been kind of grown up with. I've gotten to know people who work extremely hard day and night to deliver affordable loans, secure savings, and insurance services, and other social services bundled. And let me just give you one example. I was a few weeks ago in Haiti, and an organization that I've been working with, and Grameen Foundation's been working with it, found that in 3 years of being part of microfinance, the percentage of families that were food secure, which means they didn't have to worry about going hungry most of the time, had gone from 27% to 71% in 3 years. So, so this is the kind of change that happens, and it's the kind of change that most microfinance organizations measure themselves by at the same time as they're measuring their financial efficiency in delivering services.
Okay. So when it comes, you talk a lot about your relationship with these other organizations. Does Grameen Foundation itself, or do any Grameen Foundation subsidiary organizations make loans directly themselves?
Yes, we absolutely. In fact, these 8 networks that that are part of what we call the Microfinance CEO Working Group that I co-chair, they are composed of 300 organizations around the world, meaning each of those 8 has special relationships with organizations in different countries that collectively serve over 200 million. Over 100. I'm getting the numbers mixed up, but let's say tens of millions of poor families around the world, and so these organizations are the ones that really do the work. These network organizations are kind of associations of organizations that share common values, often share common information technology systems, and these are some of the groups that you may be familiar with. First-rate organizations like Axion, Women's World Banking, Pro Mujer, World Vision, and so they're the organizations that kind of aggregate these on-the-ground lending organizations that that we provide services to and work with every day, and so it's really a team effort with organizations working at various levels, but ultimately it ends with, and all of that whole system is invisible to a woman who gets delivered a $110 loan. In fact, I was just interviewed around the 10-year anniversary of the tsunami yesterday morning, and I was going over my files of my trip to Indonesia in 2007, where we worked with an organization called Comida, which at that point was serving just about 1,200 tsunami survivors with loans of $110. And today that organization has grown well beyond Banda Aceh, the tsunami-affected area, to serve 172,000 poor families throughout Indonesia. And we were there at the outset, kind of setting them up for their first, literally several dozen clients, and now they're again in the hundreds of thousands, and doing it, in a very ethical and efficient way. And so this is how it functions. But to that poor woman getting the loan in Banda Aceh, again, this whole structure is invisible. It's a loan officer, a man or a woman, coming and providing the capital that they need to again begin better leveraging their own capabilities and desire to get out of poverty.
And do any of those loan officers carry the Grameen name when they're getting the support through Grameen Foundation, or is it just the partner name once you get to that loan officer? It's outside of Bangladesh, where obviously Grameen Bank is a major force at the retail level for providing microfinance services. With a couple of exceptions, it is, we're kind of quietly in the background as a facilitator and enabler of that local organization, but they will, the client will understand the name of the organization that is providing them the service, and normally that's a name that makes sense in the local language of that country, that often will have something to do with either the service, the credit, or the savings, or the kind of a bank or finance, and also they're woven in are words like hope and share and trust, that is a kind of are more go with the how and the values that the service is provided. And so you take those types of words, put it in a local language, and then you'll see the names of many of these organizations. And again, the Grameen name will probably be, kind of something that they're only distantly aware of. We tend to operate more in the background and put up front that local organization that is the face of microfinance, or the face of the service. One of the things we've gotten also going at is one of the organizations we try to enable sometimes are government agencies and help them work more efficiently, such as the Ghana Health Service, that has been our key partner in our health initiatives in Ghana, for example. Okay, thanks. That's something that I've wondered about for a long time. So I want to remind everyone who's participating, you can submit questions through the chat panel on the on this meeting, and also you can submit questions through Twitter with hashtag GrameenFDNChat. We've got a question here from Sue. She asks what metrics you can point to highlight the successes Grameen Foundation has had, as opposed to merely talking about activity metrics. And related to that, you were talking before about how poverty has been reduced by half by about 2015. This is certainly one of the metrics. I hope there are going to be others you can talk about. But when it comes to this poverty reduction number, that's measured by what and cut by half since what year? Very good. So let me take the second question first, and help me, Bill, if I fail to come back to the first one. In the year 2000, so shortly after we were launched, there was something called the Millennium Development Goals, or for short MDGs. And goal number one, and number one, because it was seen as the most fundamental and important, was to reduce poverty by half, not the percentage, but the number, which was actually more aggressive, because the number of the population would be continuing to increase, and reduce it by half from the baseline in 1990. And there have been some goals set for humanity in 1990 to be achieved by 2000. So 1990 was a kind of a well-known baseline, and they said the goal is to reduce it by half by 2015 based on the 1990 baseline. And so what we're talking about here is round numbers, is reducing the number of absolute poor from 2 billion to 1 billion. And that goal will be reached in 2015. In fact, as the dust settles, it may actually be reached a year early. In countries where microfinance and other social innovations have been widespread, that goal was even reached a couple of years ago, despite
the global financial crisis and other shocks that have hit the system. So, that's I think a very important goal. Now, Grameen Foundation does not work in all of the areas of the Millennium Development Goals, but we do track metrics related to health and agriculture, and especially in terms of healthcare, because that's been an area. But in some sense, we track them because we feel that they're so integrally related to whether we're going to make progress on poverty. Again, this new goal is to reduce poverty again from 2015 to 2030 to under 3% of the global population, which would be again quite aggressive as the Millennium Development Goals were. In terms of metrics, I think it's extremely important, and this is a point that we raise over and over with other humanitarian leaders, to not just track what you call activities, or what some people would say are outputs, such as many cases people have a goal of a project which is to build a certain number of schools, or even to put a certain number of people in school. But ultimately the test is, are people being better educated, and is that leading to other outcomes? And so we've actually been a thorn in the side, in a certain sense, of many others working in the humanitarian field, to say that we should measure not just simply whether our projects are producing outputs, but whether they're actually producing outcomes, whether poverty is being reduced among those who are benefiting from various products and services. And we've taken a very strong role in kind of synthesizing and publicizing the research that has been done at various universities around the world about where microfinance, for example, has been most effective. We've developed a very simple to use tool called the Progress Out of Poverty Index that is based on something Professor Yunus developed called the 10 Indicators of Poverty. And this allows you at the end of the day, as often as you want, but usually on an annual basis, to actually bring a simple survey to clients of any poverty reduction intervention, and to get a very reliable read on where they stand with respect to the poverty line, whether they're getting closer to it or whether they've even surpassed it. We recently put out something called the Poverty Movement Report, looking at several organizations in the Philippines that have been collecting this survey data for 5 years, and it shows how quickly, and it's not always the same, how quickly poverty is being reduced among long-term beneficiaries of microfinance in the Philippines. So that for us and is critically important, because I don't think we're going to be getting massive new resources for poverty reduction out of the world from the global community. We have to use the resources we have a lot better, and that's going to come from measuring outcomes and impacts, not just inputs and outputs. And this is, again, a point that we raise repeatedly and also apply to the work we do, but we think it's important that it be braced by the larger humanitarian community to make sure we have the biggest impact for what is probably a fixed amount of resources.
You know, what you're saying is consistent with a conversation I enjoyed having when I visited the Grameen Technology Center in Seattle a couple of months ago. I was talking to one of the developers who's building some of these tools that you use to get the right information to people, and we were talking about how you measure success, and he said, we don't want to just measure how many people you reach, because then you could do something like drive through a village with a loudspeaker on top of a truck and just say, say something verbally, you've reached everybody, but it didn't make any difference whatsoever.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well,
Bill, it's another question, but there's actually a point related. But let's see, is there another question coming up?
Not related to that. I was going to move to a different topic.
Go ahead. I'll find some way to.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
But I will just say one last thing about this topic. When I read the newsletters, it seems like the newsletters are often anecdotal, and they give really important pictures of, representative pictures of what's happening for people who benefit from your programs. It might be interesting to have a little article in there that talks about some of these impact metrics. The things that you just talked about are things that I don't hear very much about, and I admit that I don't go very closely through your annual report necessarily, but these are really interesting things to a lot of donors. So moving to a different question, and as a reminder, people on the call can submit questions through the chat of the meeting. We have a question from Fernando in Montreal. He asks if you could tell us more about the community knowledge workers and just give an update on that project.
Sure, I'd be happy to. In fact, your question or your reflection about reach versus impact that you had when you came by our offices recently kind of goes to the heart of why we created Community Knowledge Worker. Basically, some years ago, we partnered with Google and a phone company in Uganda called MTN to develop a way to allow farmers to access information through their cell phones by sending a text message with a question in it about farming best practices. And we found that millions of farmers actually used it, even just in the first 6 months it was live. And the researchers told us, we said, tell us whether this is working. And they said people are using the system, and their knowledge of good farming practices is increasing, but they're not actually changing their practices. They're not actually applying them. And if you think about it in the U.S., where diet books fly off the shelves, but a lot of people don't eat any better or exercise more, even though they read them, it's a kind of analogous situation. So we said, well, we need to do more than just make the information available. And we, in another version of what was originally called Farmer's Friend, we developed the Community Knowledge Worker program, where we basically allowed asked each community in Uganda to select one farmer who was a little more literate, maybe gotten up to 8th grade education, and gave this person a little bit more, a cell phone that wasn't a full smartphone like you and I might have, but still a little upgraded from a so-called feature phone. And we loaded onto it an encyclopedia's worth of agricultural information vetted by local experts. And we kind of give them a 2 weeks training on how to use it, and they were now the champion of this information in their communities. They would be the extensionist who was on site, who could answer questions based on this kind of encyclopedia in their pocket. And what we found was a third-party research that we brought in again said that this did significantly increase the application of good farming practices, and in addition, by loading onto the phone information where people could check market prices, where they could get the best price for their crop, and they wouldn't necessarily be cheated anymore by middlemen who would come by and buy up their crop for what they said was a fair price, that the price that farmers got for their crops went up significantly. And this is research that is available on the internet. It's been published, and it's easy to find. So the Community Knowledge Worker program, at its height, it was working with 1,200 community knowledge workers throughout Uganda, I think roughly reaching 40% of the villages in the country. What we're doing now is looking to see how to provide a more intensive series of services through the 600 most active community knowledge workers so that the impact could even be higher. Secondly, we're looking to find out, with the support of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, how we can integrate it into the agricultural extension program of the country that has been supported by the World Bank, and it has and so we don't want our system to necessarily be totally disconnected from the more traditional agricultural extension service. If we can integrate it in, that's where I think we'll have the longest term benefit to the farming families of Uganda, and it can really operate on virtually a nationwide basis, so that these gains that we've seen in the areas where CKW has been present can become the general phenomenon throughout Uganda, and become a model for other countries where we've transferred a version of CKW to Colombia and Guatemala, and now it's gearing up to start in Ghana as well.
Okay. Yeah, I was getting ready to ask about countries other than Uganda. So was Uganda then the first country where you did this?
Yes, Uganda. You know, we're a strong believer in well, two things. One is the power of working with the private sector, and second of all, the power of leveraging the passion of individual human beings within organizations or people in the civil society. And in 2001, we were approached by the head of MTN, the largest phone company in Uganda. It's a South African company with a major presence in Uganda, and they were just so passionate about applying some of the things that had worked well in Bangladesh and Uganda. So they were a major, well-resourced organization, and they were, you know, really passionate about doing this. So we've made Uganda kind of one of our big kind of innovation hubs and R&D hubs globally. But we're active in certainly, you know, several Asian countries. We're about to do kind of a national scale up of our health initiative, MoTech, with the BBC Trust in India. We're launching an impact investing fund in India. We have significant operations in the Philippines, Ghana, Kenya, and Colombia, and operating in a smaller scale way in a number of places, including Guatemala, where we've taken a kind of a version of the CKW program. And our in-house impact investing fund, the Pioneer Fund, has investments in another half a dozen countries, and our joint venture impact fund around agriculture, the Fair Trade Access Fund, is active throughout Latin America. So we have a pretty big footprint, but there are a certain number of countries where we've gotten a critical mass of private sector partners, civil society partners, the blessing at a minimum of the government, and again, Uganda has been one of those hubs for us, and it's again going strong. I'll be visiting there in let me see, I guess in mid-February, and again, it's a great team on the ground there.
Sounds great. I like the idea of having you know, one place where you that you use as a laboratory. I think that makes a lot of sense to develop just a lot of strength of your organization there to then leverage out to other countries. We have a question from someone who asks about, they say, you talked about work in microfinance and then agriculture. Their question was, are you considering combining those areas? Or what I would say is, you know, what's the overlap? When you're working in a place and you have agriculture and you have microfinance, how often are these people using both services?
Well, you know, that's what we're seeing. It's a great question. We're seeing that our sweet spot going forward is to combine both financial services and kind of agriculture extension or information-based services in the same basic service delivery to a small farmer and a subsistence farmer. And so, what does that mean in practice? We've developed a model that we're very excited about expanding after a pilot phase in Kenya called e-warehouse, electronic warehouse. Basically, what it does is for a community of 5,000 farmers in Kenya that we've kind of signed up for the pilot. Number one, it's about providing them with, like we did in Uganda, with extension services, to help them, again, apply better farming practices. But also, once they're in that system and we have visibility into what they're farming and when the crop is going to come up, what typically happens is their crop will come in, they'll harvest their crops, and they'll be under pressure to pay off loans that they may have taken to buy fertilizer or seeds or labor to to help harvest the crop if it's maybe a couple of people. And so what they are forced to do often is sell the crop when the price is the lowest. So we've basically set up a system whereby, through getting to know them, through providing these information services, we give them a loan, facilitate a loan really from a third party, so they can, for what is roughly half the value of their crops, so they can pay off, and anything they need to related to the bills that piled up in preparing for the harvest, and then keep their crops for a couple of months to let the price go up. And what we found is that when we do that, the amount that they sell their crops for can go up even after they paid off the interest on the loan that they got, that we helped facilitate, which isn't that much because it's usually repaid in 3 or 4 months. The net benefit can be as much as 40 to 50% of the value of their crops, and this is something that can give the farmer much more in terms of putting food on the plates of their families and having money to reinvest in their farms to make them more productive in the future. This isn't 4 or 5%. This is 40 or 50%. So it's this type of initiative where you're providing both finance and technology together, technology-based information service, where I think we're going to find the biggest impacts over time. And it's important to know that one of the successes in microfinance has been growing a sustainable financial services business for the world's poor and the world's poor women. It has not been that successful in actually figuring out how to provide finance to small farmers and subsistence farmers. More likely, it's in financing and better at financing artisans, small-scale industry, trading type of businesses, shopkeeping, but it has not done a great job of figuring out how you provide money to a farmer who's going to spend the money on their crop but won't see any income from that for maybe 4 or 5 months. And what we're trying to do here is, through a different kind of rethinking of microfinance and with this agricultural extension aspect built in, fill in some of the white space left behind by the first wave of microfinance evolution.
All right. We are getting really close to the end of our time here. And we've got one question. Maybe you can just take a minute or two to answer this. Question is from Liz. She asks, what keeps you excited about going to work each day?
Well, that is a great question. I'm very excited by, all I have to do is think back to my last trip to one of our field offices to see the excitement in our employees and volunteers in the countries where we have full-scale operations, and particularly in terms of the sense of optimism and gratefulness of the clients. When I was preparing for this interview, media interview on Sunday morning early about the tsunami, I was rereading an email that I'd written a few years ago after visiting with people that had been, lost relatives to the tsunami. One case, someone who lost 4 children, a husband, and yet, with access to just a small loan, was able to get back on her feet, and how grateful she was. So just getting back and reminding myself of that. Also, my colleagues, the idealism and energy of my colleagues, people like Darwin, Elizabeth, who's here. Elizabeth had the opportunity to visit 3 African countries, I believe, earlier this year for the first time, and that stoked her a sense of optimism and idealism and energy that really pervaded the office here. And also, we have a network of more than 18,000 volunteers that have joined our Bankers Without Borders program, and these are people, they're not by the definition of the program, they're not being paid at all for their work. But again, this sense of idealism, wanting to leverage their talents for this movement to end extreme poverty in the world, that's also knowing that I'm probably going to come in contact with a couple of them along with my colleagues over the course of a day. Boy, in the words of someone who advises me, said, it's time to look for a new job when you're more excited about Friday than about Monday. And I said, boy, I'm still very much on that end of the spectrum of, when Monday morning comes around, I just can't wait to get into the office and pick up where I left off, on Friday evening the week before. It's a great privilege to really work with and lead this team.
Well, Alex, I would say one proof that I have that you are excited about coming to work each day is that after so many years, you're still there. You're rock solid at Grameen Foundation. Keeping this organization as reliable as it is, and for me to have a chance to talk with you has also actually reinforced my mental support for the organization, and it's just been so great for me to talk with you. I hope that the other people on the call have, whether you've submitted questions that we've been able to get to or not, I hope that you've also been able to feel a renewed enthusiasm about the great work that Grameen Foundation does. And Alex, again, thank you. I'll turn the time over now to Darwin to wrap things up.
Great. Well, thank you, both of you. The hour sure went fast, and we're so sorry to any of our supporters. If we didn't get to your question, we hope to have you join us at a future event. And we're also hoping to have a blog post up with some questions that we didn't get to, so please look for that. Once again, Alex, as always, we appreciate your insights and all the work that you do to help poor people around the world with our organization here. And Bill, thank you for moderating this discussion. And to all of our supporters, you can see on your screen we have a few ways you can support us, and so many of you have already supported us. You've been really, really dedicated donors in the past, many of you for years and years, and we so appreciate that. And right now is a very special time of year. We have a matching challenge from our board of directors. Right now it's more than $160,000 that will be matched dollar for dollar now through December 31st. So if you haven't yet made a year-end gift, please do consider that. And this is a great time to take advantage of this and make a meaningful gift this season. And secondly, as Alex mentioned, we do have a volunteer corps of more than 18,000 volunteers from around the world who can work with our organization and other poverty-focused organizations as well. And if we had many questions about internships and about volunteering, so the answer there is to visit bankerswithoutborders.com. It is not just for bankers, it is for any volunteer who wants to make a difference to fight poverty. And lastly, you can also find us online on Facebook. You can just search Grameen Foundation, or I believe it's facebook.com/stoppovertynow. YouTube, our URL is youtube.com/Grameen. You see our Twitter handle there at GrameenFDN, and of course you can follow Alex at AlexCounts. And thank you for those who are following on Twitter. If you want to look up our live tweets, I think we had a few people who were tweeting, so shout out to Broward Training for some great tweets, and you can see those online. And just once again, thank you both for all of your help today, and to all of our supporters and donors and volunteers who are joining us today. We truly appreciate you, and we look forward to a future live chat and video event. So thank you all. So thank you, Alex, and thank you, Bill. We'll be signing off now. Okay, thanks, everyone.